FOBtv, the future of business. I want to thank all of you guys for joining us today, and I want to welcome my guest, Ved Sen. Ved, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Kevin. Really good to be on here.
Ved, where are you calling in from today?
I'm in London, where it is reasonably sunny today, which it hasn't been for the last week. I've just come back from India, so I've clearly brought some good weather back with me.
That's terrific. Well, thank you for joining us the day after flying all the way back from India. I know that's not an easy trip. And you and I were just talking about, what's it like to do international travel in the age of COVID. What was your experience?
I think it was arduous, but not surprising. There were no unpleasant shocks. Travel's a bit harder. You have to account for a little longer for all the processes. And of course, you worry about being locked up in a tin can for 12 hours, flying to the sky. So there's no getting away from the virus. But I think overall, it's under control. And I guess the airline staff are doing an incredibly good job, as are people at airports, because they're obviously more exposed than the rest of us.
Yeah, and you said they gave you almost an overalls to wear.
That's right. That's right. It's one of those sort of PPE style things, and it does make it look like you've kind of gone into an Apple video of one of those sort of everyone wearing the same costume and marching away into a flight. It's got that feel to it.
Well, I'm glad you made it here safe and joined us today. Now, you work in digital strategy, innovation, and acceleration. You're also the author of a book, Doing Digital, Connect, Quantify, and Optimize. So you've got this huge wealth of information and history and experience, Ved. So that's why I reached out so I could pick your brains and we could have these kind of discussions and share our experiences here. So thank you again for joining us. Now, share with the audience, what's the mandate of your group there? What are you tasked to do?
Like everything else in innovation, it tends to evolve. And I think the way we are looking at it now is that there is a part of it which is the evangelize part, which is really about saying, how do we get the word out? There's so many great things that some of our colleagues are working on. And sometimes that kind of starts to feel like a well-kept secret, especially on the R&D side. So a part of what we do is really make sure that our clients can connect to some of the most amazing things that our research and development teams are building. That might be the next generation of robots, semantic systems, or microbial systems. All of that is stuff that we are currently kind of connecting to business problems. The second part of the job that we do is innovation, and innovation in all its forms. It's really all about making sure that we deliver outcomes. As I'm no doubt we'll discuss later, for me, innovation is all about starting with the problem. So what we try and do is make sure that, again, when we work with our clients, we nail down into those problems which don't have ready off-the-shelf solutions. And then we try and figure out how we can combine tech, design, commercial aspects of that and try and configure a solution and accelerate that so that we can get MVPs very quickly.
Oh, that's fascinating. Now, from my side of the Atlantic here, in the future business team, our focus is, not too dissimilar. We focus on what's changing in society, what's changing in economies, what's changing in industries, how are emerging technologies going to impact future. We look at the various scenarios that different combinations of emerging technologies might enable. Then we look at what accelerates change, what may become an obstacle to change. So all those things, which are very important strategically for companies to take a look at. And, technology is one thing, but what if society goes a different direction and suddenly your products are out of favor? Or, what's popular in popular culture? And how's that going to impact the way technology is adopted? So we have a kind of a broad spectrum of things that we're covering as well. But let's kind of touch on that here. We're all sitting in this black swan event, if you would, this unexpected event through a pandemic. Well, I guess Bill Gates wouldn't say it's unexpected, but but we are now experiencing what people have predicted with this, and is changing a lot of things. The pandemic will accelerate the use of some technologies. It'll actually stop other kinds of projects and development. So, how do you see the COVID-19 pandemic really affecting digital transformation, Ved?
So, first of all, can I say that the thing that you talked about, which is work that your group does, I'm a big fan, and it's really relevant to our work. And I think that the last point you mentioned, and again, I'm no doubt we'll cover it off in other conversations that we'll have today. This interplay of business and society, I think historically has not been as tightly integrated, perhaps, as it should be. And I think innovation is one of those areas where we consistently have to bring those together. It isn't just about churning the machine and generating profits anymore. You really have to think about things like purpose have become much more mainstream. But the pandemic probably puts just a sharper lens on that to say what are we really doing to help the world. I'm really interested also in understanding how those strands that you guys work on in connecting the dots into the future. How do we make the first few steps? How do we, as organizations, how do we make sense of that? And what can we build today that isn't simply a continuation of the past, but builds to those new futures?
Absolutely.
And so, for your black swan question, I think the way I see it is that there's some obvious things here. There is no doubt that automation is accelerating, right? And that will lead to faster maturing of certain technologies because they were already on a path, but this is just kind of making them hit those critical mass numbers faster. And you can put in that box things like robotics, drones, autonomous machines. But I think that there's a second layer to that, which is, I think, from a digital transformation perspective, the culture, comfort we have of digital and the acceptance of people to work remotely, in this kind of the world of Zoom and Teams, where we're comfortable working through digital means, I think is bringing an acceptance of digital, which I think has been one of the blockers so far. And finally, I think some of the investment constraints are falling away because on the one hand, there are some challenges for a lot of companies because they're up against the wall, and so anything that's discretionary has had to be shelved. But on the other hand, just the core business operations are requiring a level of digital transformation, which is now obviously being accelerated. So I think financially, culturally, and technologically, I see a kind of obviously there's the acceleration of a lot of transformational activities in the pandemic. I mean,
absolutely, and I think people have had to relook at all their priorities, Ved, and say, our 2020 plan is now out the window. What do we need to do to stay in business? What do we need to do to work within this new world, this new reality that we all face? And how do we need to change our business processes to address that? How can we limit human interaction so people are more comfortable doing business with us? How can we throw away some of the friction points that we used to have for security, for authentication, things like that, and look beyond that to getting smarter with that and understanding that security, all this is always a weight between, not preventing business from happening, but at the same time, making it safer and more secure. And I see there's companies that say, we don't need a signature anymore. This is enough. Others that say we're contactless. I'll touch the screen for you. You just tell me which one of the buttons on the screen do you want to push, and I'll do it for you. There's a big emphasis on the contactless payments. Of course, it's been in Europe and Asia for a long time. In the U.S., it's kind of jumped forward as a result of this. The way my mother, she's almost 80 years old, the way she shops for groceries, completely different. They've got early morning kind of elderly shopping hours restricted to those over 65. So even the process, and we do a lot of curbside and home delivery of groceries. I read in the UK, it's like 70% of people are doing at least some of their grocery shopping is being delivered now. So I see, all of these things here. And, I look just down the hall from my office right here in our home, we have 4 of our friends. They happen to be Congolese refugee children that are in our home all on laptops doing online school because their parents aren't, they're not aware and they haven't experienced this kind of stuff. So they just needed help. How do you log in? How do you, plug in the earphones and just follow along? So at least for a number of weeks here, my wife is down the hall here, just making sure they can get acclimated to online school with laptops. And then, in a lot of these kind of refugee communities, they don't all have internet at home either. So there's all these things. All of a suddenly the schools are looking to actually install internet in homes that don't have it today. The schools are letting them check out laptops like they would books. So all the kids have laptops at home. So it's just a whole different world out here, Ved.
No, no, absolutely. And coming back from India, this was made kind of brings it sharply into focus for me, because in countries where you don't take broadband connectivity as a given, what we're seeing is in London, it's very easy to forget that this is not how the rest of the world works. So we are seeing this big digital divide exactly in the way that you describe it, especially in education, because you are going to draw a very sharp line between those who have access to technology, have access to broadband, and those who don't. And that's creating a completely new, would say, unfair divide in how education is delivered. So this is something that really governments have to think about, schools have to think about, and I think this is one of those things that will actually accelerate connectivity, at least, much, much more widespread.
Oh, that's incredible here. So what industries, Ved, do you see that are really being impacted the most right now from COVID-19?
Broadly, you kind of call them into three groups, right? Those that are, there's a group that's actually benefiting, if you will. That's the wrong word to use, but they are the circumstances of the COVID-19 pandemic are actually helping them. So, if you're in the grocery business, if anything, business is up because people are having to eat out less, they're consuming more, they're buying more stuff to cook at home. So there are certain categories that are doing well. Obviously, if you're Netflix, consuming your services more than ever before. So you've got then the group that is kind of next up, which is impacted, but not dramatically. You've got the group that is, has had to completely reshape their business. Retail is a good example. So if you're a retailer, let's say you were doing half your business online and half of it was physical stores, you suddenly got that half that physical stores is completely shut down in a lot of parts of the world. So you've had to do this quick pivot to being almost 100% online retailer. And that's been a challenge, but at least those that had a strong online presence could afford to do that flip much more easily. So retail is in that third category. And then you've got people like travel, hospitality.
Oh, man, I feel so bad for them.
So I think those guys are really, they will have to pretty much reinvent themselves completely in this space to kind of even survive and stay relevant. Airlines, I think, are largely in the position of going back to governments and looking for kind of almost a nationalization, if you will.
Yeah.
But I suspect that, those that aren't, hotels and restaurants especially, are going to bear the brunt of very serious fallout.
Oh, yeah. And then I see a huge change in education, of course, as we talked about, the healthcare industry, the adoption, at least here in North America, of telehealth. There was all these obstacles and regulations and issues that kind of had delayed the adoption of a lot of telehealth kinds of services and visits. In this emergency, they threw out a great deal of that and said, just do it, and we will cover it. A huge acceleration around telehealth here.
No, I'm really happy you brought up healthcare, because one of the beliefs I've had even before the pandemic is that the 2020s will be the decade of healthcare, because so many amazing things are happening across the world. I absolutely believe that you won't recognize the healthcare of 2030. Or if you look back, you will not recognize what it was 10 years ago, because you've got things like all of the, that we in TCS do some work on microbial analysis. You've got bioelectronics, you've got telemedicine, and there are so many changes in service delivery models. I think the pandemic will accelerate a lot of that, but we were already on the path to completely a new way of doing healthcare, which hopefully we'll now see faster, which is great, because, there are entire sets of ailments and diseases and conditions that will become fundamentally curable, and people will not think twice about that. So the level of suffering through all of that will go down dramatically over the next 10 years. So I'm really looking forward to that as well.
Oh, yeah. And just, we've all experienced this pandemic now, and we are, for the most part, we all have come to believe this is one of many that we may end up experiencing. On average, there's a pandemic every few years already. It just doesn't reach this size. But who's to say there's not going to be a whole series of these? So the acceleration we're seeing in the ability to create vaccines, to create therapeutics, to have monstrous leap ahead with the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence to help us quickly zero in on the best vaccine candidates. All of these things, I think, are going to be permanent fixtures going forward that will accelerate, the resolution of these kinds of things in therapeutics and vaccines and all that. So I see that as well.
Not to mention genetics, because that's going to play a very important role. I
Oh
think we're
yeah.
discovering, and I don't think that any of this is kind of mature as yet. But certainly, why does the COVID-19 impact certain populations differently from others? What are the underlying causes? So I think there are things there that also will give us a big boost in how we deal with future pandemics. And of course, you may have come across the work that some of our colleagues have done in our research and innovation space, where they worked out they used AI to create molecule types that could accelerate path to finding cures for whether by vaccines or others. But that whole journey of how you identify molecules that might be useful to address the COVID-19, even that has the enormous amounts of AI going in now. So yes, all of that I'm really seeing will get accelerated. At the other end, we're doing a lot of work for, that we do a lot of work for how we keep elderly people safe in their own homes using technology, using sensors and devices, because right now elderly people today are even more susceptible and more vulnerable to the COVID-19 crisis. So, I don't know about the exact numbers in the US, but certainly in the UK, a very large percentage of the fatalities around COVID-19 were in care homes. What you've got is a scenario where people don't want to move to care homes. So we've got to find better ways of looking after people in their own homes, which we can do through technology today. And we can make that non-intrusive, privacy assured, and make sure that the care community is actually able to stretch its already meager resources to actually look after a much broader set of people to a much higher level of care. So that's absolutely game changing, I think, and we're looking forward to that as well.
That's a perfect example, Ved, of an area where, because of the pandemic, the research and the work and projects and everything are being accelerated in that area, because it certainly has highlighted and emphasized a big gap in our ability to, resolve those kinds of things.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We look at how school has changed, how healthcare has changed. Let's talk about work. I mean, you and I are using Zoom. We collaborate. We use a lot of Microsoft Teams here at TCS. So, we're actually communicating with each other probably more than we would in a normal time. How do you see that impacting the world of the future of work? And maybe if you have some insight in how actually TCS, which you and I are both a part of here, how did TCS kind of address this change in work environment?
So let me do that in two parts. So to your first question, when I was in the plane coming into London, I saw, the gentleman opened up a laptop next to me, and he was working on a PowerPoint, and the first slide of that was 5-year plan, and that's all I saw. But that made me smile, because I think the thing that's really gone away is the 5-year plan.
No, except for that guy.
so in terms of impact of work on work, I think the big thing is how we deal with uncertainty, and the fact that the old model of plan and execute doesn't work anymore. It's not just this particular pandemic, but we're hit by so many uncertainties in the world today that this model, I think the big change is really going to be how we are moving away from plan and execute to kind of a sense and respond world. To an extent, agile working pushes us in that direction. But I think beyond just being a way of developing software, how agile becomes the way we run organizations, where we don't try and kind of detail out what we're going to do 6 quarters down the line, but really to kind of become much more agile organizations, I think is going to be a big change in how we work. The second thing I think this will do is improve our resilience levels, because I think a lot of times organizations over periods of stability and growth, everyone does well. So people get a little bit lazy, people get a bit complacent. So we just kind of churn go through the motions, and everyone makes the decent profits that they need to. But this kind of really shakes out the industry, and anyone who's not really got the right reserves, the right practices, the right levels of resilience will suffer. So I do think this is a really important part of resilience building that's going on as well. The third thing I think is changing is, someone put this really well. We're moving from a world of kind of work-life balance to a world of work-life blending. And so this idea that you go to work and you come back and then it's home life and work life, and these two are very distinct, obviously has gone away from many of us. You talked about, your wife helping out with the kids across the hall. I'm sure you have your own set of things that you do outside of work, and they kind of they start to blend. You don't have fixed times and after 6 I don't do work. And you, of course, I think you work insane amounts, non-work with work. And so we're finding new ways to blend it. And because it's all at hand, it's all, we're at home. I could easily take 10 minutes out and spend time with my daughter. I think those are the new ways of working we're going to see.
Absolutely. I mean, especially since the office is also your school, it's also your home, it's also where you relax, and it's where you eat. I mean, we're in this biosphere, if you would. We live and work all in the same environment. So how could you do anything but that, right?
And you don't have to bunch them up anymore. I mean, earlier, because you had to block in this amount of commute, it didn't make sense. You couldn't step out of work for half an hour and do anything else because it would take you that much time to just get out and come back in. But now that you can actually instantly switch off work and do something else, why wouldn't you?
Right.
Right.
It's just fascinating when COVID hit, both here in the U.S. and all around the world, actually, in India as well. Our own company, as well as many of the companies that we support and provide services to, sent hundreds of thousands of people home. Just the amount of work and technology and thought that had to go into sending, probably globally, of course, millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions even, of workers home to work from their home. The amount of infrastructure and security and applications and collaboration software, I mean, that has rocked the world of work as well, hasn't it?
I dare say you are right now working off a laptop, and that's how we're talking. But imagine that many of those workers that we're talking about don't use laptops at all. They use desktops. And they work in these development centers where you are having to, typically, even as you and I as TCS employees can't walk into those spaces because we're not authorized.
Right.
We're having to take those guys and send them to work out of home. And so physically transporting some of those devices to the home, setting them up, providing VPNs. So yes, the logistical challenges of that, mind-boggling. And that's just level one. Because that's just getting people, we've constructed this kind of Maslow's hierarchy of work from home. So you've got at the base, you've got connectivity and security, which is what we've just spoken about. And then at the next level, you've got things like productivity and engagement, which is, yes, you've got connectivity, but are you able to work with your colleagues? Are you able to follow your operational processes and do all the stuff you need to? And then right at the top, what we're seeing is a really fascinating thing that's emerging is the idea of well-being. Because essentially what's happened is all your employees have become invisible. The person you used to see every day sitting next to you, working with you, having a cup of coffee, talking about what's going on, you don't see them anymore. And that level of informal chit-chat around the cooler has obviously gone away. And what's vanished with that are the cues that tell you this person is doing well, not doing well, they're stressed, they're undergoing some kind of problem at home, which you can kind of tell by their behaviors. So suddenly, for organizations, for leaders, you are suddenly thinking, I just don't know what's going on with someone in my team. And we know that there are many stresses. People who live alone have a kind of loneliness problem. People who have young kids have a problem of managing toddlers at home and balancing that with work. Unfortunately, there is a rise of domestic violence across the world with lockdown. So all of these problems are manifesting themselves. And as an organization, it suddenly becomes apparent that we need to be thinking about that layer that we haven't had to think about in the past and doing something about it. So that's where we've been focusing as well. And that TCS has always had a strong position in looking after employees. We do a lot of work on fit for life and health and mental health awareness and diversity. And all of that actually is becoming even more important in a world where we don't see our employees apart from this little curated screen. And so it becomes even more important to be able to tell when are people getting stressed, when are they too anxious, or maybe their physical health is suffering because they're just not ergonomically set up at home to work in the way we do in office. So well-being, I think, is going to be one of those really important things that organizations have to take on board and deliver, hopefully, at scale and through platforms, but something that did not exist as a separate layer about 3-4 months ago.
Oh, absolutely. I am impressed every morning here at TCS when I get up and there's advice on how to do yoga, on how to sit and stretch at your chair, how to deal with anxiety. I think this week some of the advice was how to deal with anxiety and the tools and the programs and stuff that were provided. Yeah, so it's almost much more of a family environment, because if you're going to work when everybody's dispersed and distributed, you need to understand, as you well pointed out, Ved, that there's all these things happening. It's not just work and play. There's all these real life kinds of issues, and I know that TCS seems to do a very effective job on that. So we aren't the only ones, though, as workers that are being impacted. Consumers all around the world are changing their buying habits, changing their behaviors. What are you seeing from your perspective, Ed?
Yeah, I think that, for example, there's a place where consumers and employees kind of merge, and that's the gig economy. And I think it's really made a big impact, on the gig economy. And I want to focus on that primarily because that's an area where we're also seeing this kind of the pressure of all the companies that work in that space, how people are consuming differently and what pressure is putting on those employees. But also, we're all workers and consumers. So if fundamentally our working conditions are changing, how it is changing our consumption patterns. There is that on the one side, and that's a big topic by itself, the gig economy and how that intersects with consumption. Maybe we can delve into that some other time. But the other part I want to talk about is, I think from a consumer perspective, the fact that we're culturally okay with digital channels is a new thing. Earlier, you had the kind of spectrum of people. Some people were inveterate, online shoppers. Some people wouldn't touch e-commerce with a barge pole, very scared of using their credit card online. But I think that needle has moved a lot. So the level at which we are all becoming comfortable with schooling, with working, with communicating, with talking to family members, has made the digital channels much more central, but also much more acceptable to pretty much everybody. So that's a big shift, I think. The cultural acceptance of digital is going up dramatically.
And let me just add to that real quick here, Ved, and then we'll get back to your thoughts there.
Please.
I interview, as part of my work here, I interview executives and publish the interviews routinely on a weekly basis. And it used to be a large number of the CEOs that were on my program. We would talk to them and they would have an assistant over their shoulder, like setting up Zoom and showing them where the link was, showing them how to do all that. Now, all the executives have had to learn this themselves, because they don't have their assistant at home and they're on Zoom all day long. So, these little nudges, right, that the COVID and the pandemic has forced all of us to take that leap and to start ordering groceries online we didn't do before, to using collaboration tools even if you're not comfortable. I think, one of the industries we haven't talked about is the baseball hat, or just the hat industry. That must have exploded, because now everybody, first thing they do in the morning is put on their hat because they're going to be doing Zoom or Team or something else.
When every day is a bad hair day.
I know. So baseball hats, plexiglass, wipes, hand sanitizers. Boy, we needed to invest in that last year, Ved.
That ship sadly is sailed. But you know what? I was amazed this time when I was in India. It doesn't matter what kind of shop you are. You might be selling electronics, you might be selling food, you might be selling sports equipment. Everybody has a counter of hand sanitizers. Everybody's selling. You cannot go to any environment where you can't buy hand sanitizers. And I don't know how good they are or how authentic all of them are, but they've flooded the market.
So education. So, I shared earlier, Ved, that we've got 4 students in the room right on the other side of my wall here, all doing school. And so I'll walk out there and look over their shoulders. And it's fascinating to me, the stuff that teachers are able to get the students to do. They merge physical and digital by saying, okay, let's do a scavenger hunt. Run over and find a round object in your house. And so the kids will leave their desk, run around the house, find something round, bring it back, and everybody shows it. Then they say, go find a vegetable that's green that you can show the room. And they'll run away from the desk, bring a vegetable back, show everyone in the class. So they're interacting. It's that combination of both digital and physical. Also, the ability for the kids to draw on the screen and then just save it, and it pops up for all the classmates to see each person's drawing, and then explain it and talk about it. And so I see this interaction between the physical and the digital, and how the kids, of course, they just jump on this. You give them a couple weeks and they will be completely comfortable the rest of their life and how to do this. But I love the variety of applications that allow the interactions of the kids. You know, that photo one, they have a little side photo one that just says, hold up your vegetable and then click on it. And it takes a picture and puts it up. So then at the end of that session, you have all the objects for each of the students displayed for the whole room. One of the kids in the room next to me is 7 years old, little David. And they asked him to talk about like what they did over the summer and record it on video. So they had a little box there for a video recording. He just clicks it, talks about his summer. That gets saved and shared with the whole class. So the ability to interact and share, I'm just really impressed.
So don't you think, Kevin, that this is the thing, that it's kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, we've got this kind of, we're all talking remotely, so it's kind of increased the value of human interaction.
Yes.
We're desperate to actually meet real people.
Yes.
But on the other hand, the example that you just talked about, how amazingly we are actually able to do human interaction without making it feel like technology anymore, right? I mean, technology is really going away by becoming omnipresent in everything. We don't think of it as tech anymore. It's press a button and talk, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about this technology, all this kind of technology. At the beginning of this year, you must have had your eyes kind of on the technology you thought was the coolest out there, the most interesting, the technology that was just sitting there ready to have a blowout impact on the world. What technology was it, and how has it changed after the pandemic?
So, like I said, I go back to the point I was making about healthcare, because I really felt that a lot of incredible tech was coming to healthcare. I don't know if you've come across companies like Galvani, which is the Google and GSK partnership, and they're looking at curing a lot of long-term conditions through completely a bioelectrical mechanism. So rather than the biochemical way, which is how we ingest tablets or take drugs or whatever it is, this is all about putting in a chip that will actually control the signaling between your brain and, let's say, your pancreas, and that's how you'll control diabetes in the future. So I think those kinds of technologies are absolutely, to me, sound absolutely amazing, because they are game changing as well. So I think that's one area that I still think is going to be amazing. The other one is around humanizing technology. Whether we talk about making human beings more capable, augmentation of humans, or we look at the way in which blend digital and the world of tech and humans, so robots, or as we call them in organizations, cobots, which are your employees who kind of software does work with you. So I think that's quite an interesting area for me, because that drives us towards more intelligent automation. And I think we need to tease out one really important thing here before because it's very easy to get caught up with automation, but I think the design aspects of that when we put in automation, how well we can design it is always going to be an incredibly important part of the story.
So, Ved, I want to go back to a subject you brought up earlier, which is companies can no longer follow these 5-year plans because it seems like the world is moving much faster. Today, we have to focus in on sense and response, how to be agile, how to be resilient to change. All of these things require in our entire operations, decision-making, and even thinking to run at a much faster speed. And to me, literally, that's inhumane to expect a leader, a human biological leader, to be able to change at the speed of a computer. It doesn't work that way. We live on a biological time clock, which simply doesn't allow for the speeds of a computer. And we don't think that fast, and we have emotions and we have physical needs and all those kinds of things. So it's just not that kind of world. And to me, that seems to shout out for an increasing need for robotics, for machine learning, for artificial intelligence that can consume the vast quantities of data available to all of us and make a lot of decisions and take a lot of decisions off the shoulders of humans, so humans can focus on the strategy and the future of the business. What's your take on that?
I think that you and I are on the same side here, in terms of we're both optimists. We absolutely see the path and the opportunities of things like decision systems, artificial intelligence, really doing the heavy lifting. I think the feeling I get when I look across the world is that there are people who are rushing into deploying some of these technologies and burning their fingers, and then it's almost like you blame the tech for it. So a good example is this year in the pandemic. You know that in the UK they rolled out an algorithmic method for evaluating the what is called the A levels here, which is your end of school examinations. And that was a big disaster because the algorithm itself, the results it generated and the grades it handed out clearly spoke of a bias, which was ethnic, which was economic. Then they had to roll that back very quickly. And I think that that's a good example of where you want to be. I think the direction of travel is very clear, and I fundamentally agree that we absolutely have to have AI making the decisions in specifically in areas where the world is changing fast. There's too much data. You can't crunch all the data. How would you even form a hypothesis and then test it in that kind of speed? I think the piece that we have to get around is the path to implementing that. How do we train the AI? How do we make it work? Just chucking the AI in on top of historical data, which we know has human biases in it, will simply amplify those biases. And I'm a believer of the fact that the big difference is that you can actually identify and fix the AI bias. It's much harder to fix human bias. So we have an opportunity here of not only enabling much better and faster decision making through robotics and AI, but designing it better, designing it with the governance, with the training, and so really making a dramatic improvement not only on the speed of those decisions, but actually on the quality of the decisions as well. Yeah, you probably got examples as well as you look at this era as closely as I do of where people have tried to implement it but then have burnt their fingers.
Oh, absolutely. So, with that, Ved, I want to thank you so much for your contributions, your insight, your experience today. And we're going to be filming a second part of this discussion because we have way too much to talk about, Ved.
And I haven't even asked you all the questions I wanted to ask you. So
I know. So we'll make that in part two. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
thanks, Kevin. All the best.